Extreme poverty is on the rise, and in this region, signs of those symptoms are showing up especially in downtown St. Louis. Tent cities have formed along the riverfront, under bridges throughout the city, and most recently, under Mayor Tashara Jones' window at City Hall. The city has opened some new shelter beds in recent months, but the surge in demand is far outpacing supply. As that problem grows more urgent, a newly installed progressive board of aldermen has waded into the complex issue and so far can't quite seem to agree on the best way forward. 7th Ward Alderwoman Alisha Sonnier drafted the Unhoused Bill of Rights, and she joins us now on the record. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
You made a strong comment the other day at a committee hearing that St. Louis is perpetuating poverty. What is a policy that you can point to right now and say that perpetuates and creates a cycle of poverty?
The strongest point that I would say that perpetuates poverty is right now knowing that 0 shelters have opened through the process that we have in place in the last 15 years is a perpetuation of poverty. We have to make sure that when we have processes in place that there are regulation processes, but not elimination processes. And obviously in that hearing that you were there to see, I made the point that if we had a process that hadn't allowed a liquor license to be granted in 15 years, we would have changed it. If we had a policy that hadn't allowed for development subsidies such as tips or abatements to be granted in 15 years, we would have changed it month 6. Here is a process that is not allowing those who are most vulnerable amongst us to get access to what they need to get stabilized. It's been in place for 15 years, it's been effective, and we have a responsibility to change it.
One of the clear differences is a city can collect tax from a liquor store and would have a hard time collecting much tax from a tent camp.
Correct. You would have a hard time collecting tax from a tent camp, but sometimes as a city, especially when you're talking about financial responsibility, you look at what are you already spending on the issue and could you actually save money if you were to address it proactively. So right now when we deal with our unhoused population, we have to use a lot of police officer staffing. You heard the firefighters who came to the meeting and talked about how it's something that's also falling on them. We have unhoused people who obviously cycle through emergency rooms and jails, and so those things do cost public tax dollars. So while the argument could be looked at that it doesn't save, it costs you money, you are spending money on it. And then of course I would highlight that you have to remember that many in our unhoused population are the working poor. So they do get up every day and they do go to work and they do pay taxes, but they are still poor and unable to afford housing.
Have you recognized that popular opinion may not be in your corner on this? Or how do you feel the public thought has shifted in the last few months, seeing all of what we've seen unfold?
So first, I want to just acknowledge that as a board, I think we've made a step in the right direction by, for the first time, being able to have this conversation. This bill, Homeless Bill of Rights, was proposed in 2017 by Alderwoman Green at the time, then 2019 by Alderwoman Gracia, but we didn't even get to the point of having a hearing because we didn't have city leadership that decided it was worth a conversation.
And that was all pre-COVID, pre-exacerbated poverty?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I'll say to public opinion, what I hear from my constituents and what I hear from my community is I want to be able to be in community with folks who are unhoused, but I can't do that if there's no space for them to go. If the only space for the unhoused to go is to go in the park, if the only place for them to go is to go in vacant buildings, if the only place for them to go is to go under the banister of my businesses when I open up, it's very hard for us to have in community. So what I hear in public opinion is I want city leaders to take this issue seriously and to bring a solution that involves them addressing it so that we can have community amongst us and we can give resources to those who, again, are very vulnerable. And especially when you think about the fact that it's 1 in 5 children who are unhoused, when you think about the fact that 25 to 50% of women that are unhoused are fleeing domestic violence relationships, most people want to see folks get help and get resources.
It sounds like you're saying the best permanent step is just more shelter capacity, more bed space. But until we get there, until we can build that, what do we do next? I want to ask you about one of the things in your bill. You've said in committee hearings at several junctures that people in poverty, homeless people, are not necessarily dangerous to others, that in fact they're more likely to become victims of a violent crime. Why then does your bill recommend that a police officer be stationed at each one of these tent sites or some sort of police surveillance?
Yes, so as a legislator you have to deal with the folks who are in place, and when you're thinking of your community and you're thinking of the public, that we're all concerned about safety. And the safety does not have to ultimately look like police officers. At the end of the day, if we were to have an intentional encampment, there would be a security plan and a security proposal, and there's very different measures that could be happening. Even when I had conversations with the police chief, that's kind of what we discussed. But it was better for budgeting processes. If you use the budget of the cost of officers, you know that what you have allocated to cover security should be covered in the request for proposal that will ultimately be issued.
We should note for our audience, people that have been following along, that you were one of at least 2 members of the Board of Aldermen who were out there physically helping people take down their campsites when they were being pushed from the city lawn. So you're not just somebody speaking about this issue. You've been out there helping these people through this. Winter is coming, as many advocates have said. The temperatures are taking a turn for the worse very soon. How urgent is this situation, and what's your degree of optimism that you can get agreement at this divided board over this issue in time to save people from the death that we saw last year?
I think it's extremely urgent, and I take very seriously my responsibility as a legislator, as a political leader, and as someone with some class privilege. We're talking about children, and we're talking about families, and we're talking about people who are very vulnerable amongst us. And right now in our city, it takes over 400 days to get connected to shelter and other resources. So I'm going to advocate for something that could serve them in the meantime. As far as my optimism for getting my colleagues on board, I've seen us navigate and have conversations about tough issues. The gun issue that we had with Alderwoman Spencer's bill was not an easy conversation. We made our way through that. The conversation around the short-term regulation bills, we made our way through that, which I'll add, we decided that conditional use was adequate for Airbnb properties, even though we've had violent issues and murders. We all decided as a board that was okay there.
So for our viewers following along, that basically says in the current petition process, we have to get 51% of neighbors to approve. If we do away with that and have a different approval process, the city can tell you, okay, you want to open a homeless shelter here, fine, but you must do this, that, and the other to satisfy at least some basic standards.
One of the things I've seen in public discourse is that if you take away plaid and petition, you're limiting democracy. But plaid and petition itself is inherently kind of undemocratic because only property homeowners and registered voters count as a part of that 51%. But we know that over 50% of our city are tenants, and we know that less than 30% of people go and vote in our elections. So by going
So the
to
richest among us are deciding the fate of the least of these.
Exactly.
A complex issue, no easy answer, but we thank you for joining us for part of this conversation. We'll continue to follow along. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.